Good evening, Musa. How are you doing?
Hi, Jonathan. How are things?
They're all right. A bit busy out there, doing a range of different research projects. One of which is political research, which is always fun
Hmm.
in terms of our discussions. Gives me more insights into voters and how people see political processes. So I'm quite enjoying that. But it's a lot of work. And what have you been up to?
Well, I mean, I've been running my clinic, and I've been catching up with my kind of literature more recently. There's a play I've been meaning to see. I think there's an adaptation of To Kill a Mockingbird. That's come out. Have you heard of that
I've heard
or
of
the
that.
play? Yeah.
Yeah,
No, have you
heard the
heard of
film.
heard of the play? Yeah,
I
the
haven't
play.
heard of the play. Where's that on?
Ah, well, it was in Sheffield. I sent my son and wife to see it. Only got two tickets. I had to do the babysitting, but I intend to get out there and see it myself. They came back very enthused. And then, of course, the other thing that struck my eye, actually, I don't know if you come across this. There's an adaptation of The Lord of the Flies that's coming out on BBC. I haven't seen it yet, but I thought it was just very timely, uh, very important uh, novel. I'm sure the BBC will do a good job in adapting it to drama. But I thought we'd discuss it today because it kind of brought up a lot of questions for me about society, how they're organized, the need for organization. What happens when all that declines?
You see, I thought for a minute there you were going to invite me over for dinner. So come on, let's sit
Yeah.
down and watch the TV together, and I'll cook you dinner. But you just said, oh, let's discuss the book. I'm a bit let down.
Yeah, well, okay. I will invite you, but yeah, you wouldn't. As we know you, I don't think you'd be very enamored of my cooking, right? I could probably boil
I
you an egg.
No, we're going to cook together. I tell you what, I'll come over. We'll cook
Yeah.
together. We'll cook some pizzas or something. It's fun
Okay.
food. We'll sit down and we'll watch. Is it a series or is it a one-off sort of drama? Must be a series.
Oh,
Everything's a
this yeah,
series.
it's a series. I think there's 4 episodes. I don't know very much about it.
We can binge
Um,
it.
yeah, yeah, we
Yeah.
can. That's what they do these days, isn't it?
So come on, you want to get
Uh,
serious on me? You want to tell me what you
you know
like
the
about
book.
Lord of the Rings?
You
I know the book. I think I have read it in the last few years. I think I read it in the pandemic,
is
and
it
I saw the old film of it. Uh, yeah, it's a
okay,
great book.
okay. And what was the
William
movie like?
Golding. William Golding. That's
That,
it, isn't it?
that's it. William Golding was I think a headmaster or a teacher in a boys' school, um, both before and after the war, and the book I think came out in 1954. In between that, he served in the Royal Navy, and the book is about it's broadly taken to be about the evil that men can do. It's a reflection on that, and it's a fascinating story. Yeah, what do you know about it, Jonathan? What's your view about it?
Of his life or of the story.
No, the story.
I seem to remember there's a plane crash where this
Sure.
uh, plane full of public school boys lands on an island, and rather
Yeah.
than turning into some sort of idyllic life where I think there was another book out way before called The Coral something or the others, where everyone just lives these idyllic lives. They in very reality TV show style,
Sure.
they start turning in on each other, and there's these groups formed, and they start having rituals around a pig's head. Is it a pig's head? I can't remember. That's the cover of the book. And there's a guy called Jack who's sort of running the sort of the takeover, this sort of bullying takeover. And there's a guy called Piggy and Simon, isn't it? And these kids pushed out, and it's brutal. The sort of
Oh, it's
gang
brutal.
forms, and
Absolutely.
they're brutalized. But I mean, I you know, William Golding was in the Navy for years. I read, it must have been the introduction of the book or something. He'd seen the sinking of the Bismarck. He'd seen D-Day. He was there then, and he said, "Look, I've seen what people are capable of. I can see what they can. I see what we can do. There's something in us. There's something innate in us which I will call evil, and I will show how this comes out. With great irony, by the way, but I'll come to the irony later. There's an enormous irony because you're still showing schoolboys the innocence and showing that behind the innocence there's this brutality. Left to their own,
Yeah.
they will become
No, all right.
savages.
So listen. So I came across this book. Obviously, I was in school. We had to read it in our English literature lessons. I'm going to give you the context because um, so I think it's a fantastically important book. And when I came across it first, I didn't really understand it, right? So I went to, as you might know, I went to a private school, public school.
Didn't know that.
Uh, you didn't know that? Okay, sure.
I didn't know that. Maybe you said it. It just drifted.
I went to a public school in Surrey.
Was
Okay,
it a
and
very well known one or a lesser?
it's extremely well known. It's called the Royal Grammar School, and it now has branches, I
Part of
think,
it.
in Qatar and Dubai, and it's got a franchise model. But it's a very successful school, and I had a really good schooling for it. Um, Back then in the 90s, early 90s, early to mid 90s, the school was basically all white. I mean, that's what Surrey was. That's what Guildford was at that time. It's changed a lot, right? Um, my parents were kind of ambitious, wanted me and my twin brother to go to the school. We were complete outcasts at that school. We struggled as well at points. I'll speak about that later, right? But it was a fantastic education, Jonathan. I mean, I cannot tell you what a great education it was. It was aimed at the lessons of that we had learned from the Second World War, the rules-based order, and so they taught us about a lot of things which I never understood the relevance or their importance at that time. I thought they had nothing to do with me, mate. They taught us a lot about First and Second World Wars, about First World War poetry. They took us through Animal Farm. They took us through the Holocaust. I might have discussed this with you in detail. I can remember kind of the build up from the putsch of Munich to Kristallnacht to the final solution. All of this, right? These were big themes in the school. You know, and then they took us through this book, right? Which of course it's not exactly the color purple, is it? This is a very classic. Well, I'm not saying the color purple, isn't it? But it's aimed at exactly the kids that I was going to school with, right? Simon and Jack and Piggy and Ralph, right? These were their names. These were the names of the kids that I went to school with, right? All white. Um, Not that that's a bad thing, incidentally, Johnson. But so what's a Pakistani kid who's reading this book, thinking, and there's no obviously in 1954, William Golding was not worried about DEI or representation, right? So there's nobody who looks like me, who thinks like me, anything like that. So, so what does this book actually speak to us? What does it tell us? And actually, um, and this was unfolding slowly for a 14, 15-year-old boy, right? The book is about society, how it's constructed. It's about otherness. It's about who gets to speak for society. It's a heavily symbolic, heavily important book. It's about decline of the rules-based order and how it all can fall apart, how it's very, very fragile. I mean, people talk about the book as talking about, an exploration of evil, but I think it's more about the fragility of the human order and the ties that bind us together. And I think that's why it's such an important book to understand and read.
So let me try and understand things because
Sure.
I've often heard this phrase rules based order. I've no idea
Okay.
what it means. What does it mean?
The Second World War was followed by building of institutions, rules, and ideas to ensure that this never happened again. As was the First World War. You will remember, right, that from the First World War, we came out with the League of Nations, the Treaty of Versailles, reparations from Germany, all of these kind of things. There were weaknesses in that order, right? These came from Woodrow Wilson's 14 points, Woodrow Wilson being the president of the United States at the time. there were weaknesses in that order, which were seen to lead to the Second World War. Historians trace this directly. I think there's very strong arguments for that. So the Second World War, the idea was that this would never happen again. You know, I mean, the Holocaust. The cry from the learning from the Holocaust, the genocide that it was never again. And then institutions were set up. Institutions such as the United Nations, the understanding of nation states, the understanding of human rights being afforded to all. That's what the rule-based order is. It's about the interrelations between nation states, individuals, and the peoples of the world, and how it is maintained in order to, Jonathan, stop that kind of grave calamity of global war visiting us again.
But how does it stop it? Whose rules are they?
Well, that's the question, isn't it?
Certainly
But
is.
I mean, Jonathan, you know the rules that I'm talking about.
I don't.
The Universal Declaration of Human Rights,
Mm-hmm.
the United Nations, the multiple organizations that have come from here, the World Health Organization, more recently the International Criminal Court, the Security Council, the idea of international law governing us rather than just being a game between great powers. This is what the rules-based order talks about.
And does it always work?
So for the last 80 years, it's managed to prevent a global calamity, hasn't it? So we've not had a war such as the Second World War. Again, we've been, in the nuclear age, we've been very, very close. But the rules-based order has, to some extent, I think there's Mark Carney's speech here, right? Remember Mark Carney's speech? He just spoke in Davos when he talked about there's a fiction, of the rules based order. That fiction hasn't always worked, but it's helped us enough to kind of maintain, open shipping lanes, trade, some kind of semblance of justice. So it's worked to a certain extent. There's been weaknesses in it.
I'm going to return to that because I mean,
Yeah.
I've got the same words written down on my piece of paper before we started. It
Good.
was something I wanted to look at is that fiction and what that
Yeah.
fiction covers up.
Mm.
But I'm also, before you do that, I can't let you just wash over the absolute horror that has occurred in those 80 years. Horror
Absolutely.
upon horror upon horror. And what you call is, don't forget, the Second World War was not a global war. South America was right out of it.
Mm.
But sub-Saharan Africa was not really part of it. There were large parts of the world that were nothing to do with it. It wasn't a world war. It's narrated as a world war. I don't know what a world war is. So we then have hang on. We then have this idea that everything has been great for ages. Well, it certainly wasn't great if you were in all those American-sponsored revolutions of South America. It certainly wasn't great if you were caught in the Cold War trap of Africa, where the Cold War was fought by proxy through guerrilla groups by both sides funding those things. It certainly wasn't working very well when we got there's countless conflicts. We've got Northern Ireland here. I didn't see the United Nations stepping in. You mentioned the Security Council. The Security Council made up of 5 members who have failed to make that more inclusive. They got 5 more rotating seats, or is it 10 more rotating seats? And on and on and on it goes. And there's been conflict and conflict and conflict, let alone the Middle East, let alone India, Pakistan, China and Russia, America and Grenada, America and here and there and everywhere, Britain, the Falklands. No, it carries on and mass civil war. Yugoslavia absolutely decimated. We have Rwanda where the UN doesn't intervene. And by the way, which may give you a clue of how we end up where we are today, following the Rwandan genocide, the Rwandan civil war and genocide to be probably more accurate, following that, the United Nations did not intervene. In fact, they spent ages, 2 weeks, arguing about who was going to paint the vehicles that finally would get there. And the person on the ground, famously has a breakdown because he witnesses this horror, and then after the RPF take out the genocidal militia, the genocidal militia flee into Congo, taking populations forcibly with them, and then the RPF go in and massacre UN refugee camps without any intervention. And it's very awful for the UN people there. So an American institution called the United States Institute for Peace, which the Trump administration is just disbanding at the moment, it's a very interesting institution. It's full of social scientists and government people. Like when I was looking at it, Condoleezza Rice was on the board, and they sort of engage a study of the United Nations in the aftermath of Rwanda. And a guy called Brown writes it, and he talks about how the United Nations doesn't really work and how all these things don't work in it. And within a few years of him publishing that book, we have another part of the global order, which the United States goes to war with Iraq despite, and the United Kingdom too, despite the United Nations asking them not to. Partly because that book disassembled how to do that. It showed how to get around the rules of the United Nations. And this is the problem. The international order of rules that we now romanticize actually hasn't worked out that well for an awful lot of people. It was not nearly as good as people think it was. And Mark Carney's point is the fiction, underlying the fiction, was always right.
Jonathan, my father once told me that the reason that we were lucky to be in Britain was that if somebody was raped or killed here, there would be justice. That's true. I mean, I know, of course, there's murders that are unsolved. There's problems with, sexual abuse and prosecution. I know this, right? But compared to the developing world, Pakistan, which is where my family ancestry is from, there can be murder, there can be rape, there can be grievous crimes. Everybody will forget about it. It will never be mentioned again. Okay? I think it's something that we who live in Europe, in the West, talking specifically about Western Europe, I take your point about Bosnia, in Canada, in America, have been extremely lucky to benefit from some kind of rules-based order between ourselves, right? Some kind of democracy, which is now being actually actively undermined, some kind of justice, and some kind of rights, right? Which can be quite detailed, profound rights. They can be rights to mental health care. They can be rights to welfare. They can be rights to healthcare when you've never put anything into the system. This is, this is almost the pinnacle or acme of civilization, except for the fact that it is inequitably distributed. And it is, Jonathan, as you have so eloquently put it, built on the violence towards other civilizations, both violence militarily and the violence economically towards, the countries in Africa, of Asia, of South America, whose minerals, resources, labor we have plundered and looted. I don't want to pretend for a moment that hasn't happened. Okay, this is the modern world. This is the reason why there is our massive immigration flows from, say, Africa to Europe, right, or from South America to America. The rules-based order. It kind of reminds me of Paul. The Roman citizen who was a Jew, who became the teacher of Christianity, controversial fellow, but he benefited from his Roman citizenship in being able to spread the message of the new faith of Christianity. And so many people have done that, right? And this still happens. I'm a British citizen. I have certain rights all over the world. Yeah, you can't easily just put me in a prison in Egypt and
Hmm.
just lock me up. You know, um, so the rules-based order has benefited people. Maybe that may be just 10% of humanity. There might just be the 300 million people who live um, in Europe and the 300 million people who live in North America and a few Australians. That might be true, but certainly that has benefited people, and there have been the fruits of progress, of intellectual development, of safety, security, which have flowed and emanated from that piece. Now, the question is, as you said, whose rules? Were the rules fair? And were there problems with the rules from the beginning, that have led to this state? And we can have this further conversation. I would say that, yeah, that the game has been rigged, as it were, from the beginning. But to argue whether rules based order helps is, I think, the point of this book, right? The Lord of the Flies. This is what is if rules are just thrown to the wind and we don't care anything about them, then we end up in anarchy. Lord of the Flies ends up with these two awful deaths, which kind of represents that and symbolize, the death of humanity and the loss of innocence.
But you're making it out like they didn't have any rules in that book. They did have rules. They had
Hmm.
rituals. They
Yeah,
then so when you say rules-based order, you're talking about certain rules which you approve of, rather than
sure.
rules that other people approve of. When you talk about the taking apart of the rules-based order, it's not like it's leaving a vacuum of rules. It's just got different rules. So, what rules do you think are positive rules, and
Jonathan,
which rules are negative rules?
where do rules essentially come from? This is part of the problem, right? Where do rules essentially come from? Rules come from laws, which come from where?
So,
Where where
you
where
you
where where,
lost you
where
lost
do
me there. I think there was a bit of a historical logical jump. What do you mean rules come from laws?
Well, I mean, another word for rules are laws. You know?
Okay,
Yeah, another. Where do they come from? Where do laws ultimately derive from? What gives laws a mandate? Why should we accept one law versus another? Where is, you know, the laws of this country ultimately been derived from?
yeah, but you're not going to like my answer. So
Yeah,
tell
go
me
on.
where you
Go.
think they're. Tell me where you think they're
So
from
so
first.
so, so ultimately, laws have to come from a place of they have to come from a place of security, and they have to come from a something which can be accepted by all individuals, right? Ultimately, laws are derived from faith or religion. Ultimately, laws come from God. Ultimately, um, and there are some very important aspects of faith or religion there, right? One is that we are all equal subjects under the creation of God. We all have rights. We all have responsibilities and roles. And if that individual innate human essence is not respected, uh, then we begin to kind of things begin to go apart. If certain people are prized about among others, then begin to be problems, and that's part of the problems in the setup of the United Nations and others, where certain nations or certain peoples uh, have more rights than others. Otherwise, what you're talking about, Jonathan, is just competing property rights of might is right,
I,
and that
but,
will lead to yeah.
but we've made such a leap. It's intergalactic. Um,
Sure, all right.
you asked where rules came from. The point I was making was you just don't like someone else's rules. In Lord of the Flies, there's plenty of rules,
Sure.
and they make up some rules and they follow them. And in the new order that is emerging in the world, there's plenty of rules. There's plenty of rules. People are getting shot for those rules. Uh, there's rules,
But, Jonathan,
and
the issue with
hang,
those rules, the issue
hang
with
on,
those rules is that
go
the
on.
arbitrary nature of them is the ad
Are they
hocism, isn't it?
arbitrary?
They're
Hang on,
they're
hang on.
arbitrary. They're ad hoc. You know.
Are
Yeah.
they?
Sure.
Well,
Have you
and
come
what
across
makes
it?
what makes a rule not ad hoc?
It has to be derived from a sense of
God?
justice.
But
Yeah,
you just said
ultimately, yeah.
these rules have come from God, and they've come from a
Ultimate.
certain God because
I,
we have
I,
a whole range of different gods out there, and they might impart different rules to different people, and different people have different communications with the gods. What is an ad hoc rule as
it's one.
opposed to
It's
any other
one.
rule?
Oh, come on, Jonathan. It's
No,
one that you
no,
make
I
up.
have no
No,
idea what you're
sure.
talking
No,
about.
no. Okay, it's one that you make up at that purpose, just to suit your needs, right? So, for example, so you've come across Zimbardo's experiments, right?
No,
You
tell
know,
me.
So Zimbardo, I believe, was a uh, academic in Stanford, who I think one summer holiday decided to do an experiment. It was the kind of first Big Brother, where he decides to get all these college students, sets them up in Stanford. You know, half of them he assigns as prisoners, the other as prison guards, right? And then just sees how they interact. They've kind of formed cliques. They form their own kind of rules. You find that the experiment had to be stopped early because the prison guards essentially just became very barbaric, right? They were, I think, led by the son of a respected professor himself, very eminent. This son who just becomes some kind of psychopath over time, and starts humiliating and denigrating the prisoners, right? So those kind of rules that are made up on the moment in order to ensure power dynamics, they have no they don't come from just a place of justice. They don't help maintain the social order. They don't help maintain um, fairness and equity between people. So I'm curious, Jonathan. If you're not feel if you're gonna disagree that laws ultimately derive from God, and I would take issue with you that there are many different gods and many different conceptions of God. I will come back to that. But I'm curious where you think that laws come from, and then what is a just law?
It's
Because
so.
I think
But
Jonathan,
hang on. You can't
yeah,
ask me a question then jump straight in. Although
go.
I'd do exactly the same. So
What
I
is a
might.
just law? What is a just law, and where does it come from?
It's positional.
Yeah,
You see, for someone who has talked about enjoying, from his point of view, the comforts of these rules that he's seeing being eroded, and we haven't talked about the nature of the erosion, which is quite interesting.
yeah, of
But
course.
the for them, these seem to be the rules that fit. Yes, I like things that adhere to my own values, and my own values tend to adhere to the culture I'm in. Uh, and some people react against it, and they'll react against it at a sort of psychodynamic level, and perhaps at a political level. But the two are highly linked.
Mm,
Um, and so the creation of rules and just rules is positional about what is just. Perhaps it's just to shoot people who are a disease upon society and who seek to erode everything that's right about society. Perhaps in some places that becomes just,
really?
and perhaps when you're shooting them, that makes a lot of sense. And perhaps there's often some academic sitting there. Watch out for academics who get involved in violent projects,
Yeah,
who justify the whole thing and give it some credence. And cherry on the cake, the academic believes this stuff at the same time. And we currently have an academic running in a by-election in England. It's going to be quite interesting. His PhD was on fascism, but
yeah.
he was liked fascism. He gradually came to realise there was a lot more to it than he realised. Yeah, right. So what makes things just? Well, you can't say my position is always right. You can't do that because
No, no.
that's
Hang on,
delusional and arrogant.
what?
So you have to say what is it that makes us just?
No,
Now, if your only way
yeah.
of doing that is to say I have some scriptures written 1,500 years ago, or I have some
Mhm.
scriptures written 2,000 years ago. Someone says I've got some scriptures which are 3,000 years old, and somehow they'll play that off against each other. If that's your only only way of knowing, then that itself is a dogma. And the problem with this is the world changes. I mean, our rules made. Let's take something recent. AI is a recent development, more or less. Our people who create rules to do with that, ad hoc rules to satisfy themselves and to satisfy their own power needs and to satisfy something, or are they not?
Hang about the
How do you create rules for new
sure.
situations? For a
No,
student who is suddenly given charge of a load of other students who are acting up in an experiment, what do? What if they've been given a manual? Would they behave differently? How do you do it? How do you train people? I mean, it's a very interesting question with the prison experiment, because I think it's in New Zealand, or it could have been one of the Nordic countries. To be a prison guard, you've got to do a degree in prison management. To become a prison guard here, you don't need any of that stuff. In our rules-based order, our prison guards are desperately undertrained compared to other countries. What effect does that have?
Okay, this is my issue with what you've just said, right? And you've just ripped up. What you've argued is that justice is something almost that's negotiated. It's positional. It depends on what's happening at the time and the context, right? You know. Well, in Nazi Germany, the context was that it was okay to euthanize and kill, disabled people, right? There's a,
Well,
you know,
it
well,
was a
that
that was a slow burner. They start
but
testing people
ultimately,
to see if they'd do
sure.
it.
Ultimately, that's where they got to.
Mm-hmm.
Ultimately, that's where they got to. Does that make it just? That was a negotiated agreement between society, for them to get to that point.
What do you mean it was a
You,
negotiated agreement?
well. Essentially, the
There's
Nazis
much
were vote. No.
negotiation.
Sure, absolutely. It's positional, Jonathan. Jonathan, I'm just going to use your terms again. It's positional.
Yes,
Slowly,
it is
slowly,
positional.
slowly, slowly. Yeah. So that kind of falls apart there. You can't say that justice is something that is positional. There has to be something that you anchor it to. Now, I'm not saying that you anchor it to competing scriptures. That's different. There are competing scriptures. There are competing understandings of God and gods. However, there is something within the human soul, I think this is very important, that is repulsed at injustice, repulsed at inequity. That I think stands the test of time of society. You perhaps might not agree with me. I do not think that you can decide on things based upon, oh well, we need to look at the context of the time, and maybe it was okay in that society.
No,
Maybe
no,
it was all right for yeah.
you misunderstand me. You misunderstand me.
Go on.
I'm not saying it was. I'm not saying it was okay, but I'm not saying you
Yeah.
can't say your own position is okay. We can't. This is the trouble. If you have rules and you have laws, and they are legitimized and become legitimate, and people start to live the rules they live under, then the rules they live under start to make sense, and it's the way we start to understand our world.
Mm-hmm.
But it doesn't make it right. But part of that rule based order, whatever the rules are, whatever the societal contract is, part of it is a key part of that narrative is what we're doing is right. And it's either what we're doing is right because this is what our gods have told us to, or what we're doing is right because we believe in humanity being in these things, or what we do is right because we are the chosen ones born of the earth who have some unique power over everyone else, magical power over everyone else, or God-given power, or cosmic power. I mean, it goes on and on. You will always narrate your own greatness. There's a
Sure.
lovely
Sure. Sure.
story.
Sure. Yeah. Okay. Go on then.
I mean,
Let's hear the story.
I always like this. Came from Marshall Silence. I once met him and said, "Oh, I love this," and he went, "Oh, that's not what I meant." But I will.
Okay.
Here's the story. So Marshall Silence, part of a big debate about what happened in the around Hawaii and all those sort of Polynesian islands, and Captain Cook. But here's how I read it anyway. Captain Cook arrives, or the English arrive, and the islanders go, I can't believe it. What an incredible ship you've got. That's incredible. And the Brits went, oh, yes, it's a very good ship. He said, and look at your weapons. They're absolutely. We could never imagine something like that. And they went, yes, you see, we've got great weapons compared to your weapons. And they said, and to think that your Christian God allowed you to have all of this. And they say, oh, yes, well, you see, our great Christian God. And then they say, and to think that our God, Lonro, gave you, this Christian God, to do all this. You see, wherever you stand, you come out at the top of the tree. That's how it works. So when you start saying, well, these rules are the rules that work, you're merely saying,
hang about.
There's the Brit. Let's disassemble it a bit. There's the Brits thinking they are the biz. They've got the best god, and there's the people in Polynesia going,
Sure.
Look how wonderful our God is to let you play with this god that they've given you, this little Christian god, which you've been given by our greater God. Everyone thinks they're great. It's just the nature of things. Your point of view is just your point of view.
I think, Jonathan, the look, we can think about the book. Let's go back to Lord of the Flies, all right?
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. There's in the characters, right? Yeah. Let's think about the important characters. Yeah. There's Ralph, who's kind of the sober politician. Essentially, these are all children. But yeah, actually, it's really fascinating because you also kind of see these in. I certainly saw this in the kids that I was around at that time. I think it's part of Golding's genius. So there's Ralph, which is the sober kind of political genius, right? There's Jack, who is the kind of slightly barbaric, might is right kind of character, has a certain degree of charisma, is able to sway the little ones and others towards him, and believes in a kind of violent way of doing things, right? There's Piggy, who is the othered, right? So Piggy, we never even get to know his name. Yeah. And he's the kind of boy essentially with glasses and freckles. He's a little bit chubby, right? But he's very intelligent. Trying to make a sundial. And then there is Simon, who's kind of this otherworldly, spiritual type figure who likes going for long walks in the woods. And essentially, at some point, discovers the Lord of the Flies, also discovers the identity of the beast, which is being used to frighten the little ones, and comes to tell the children about the nature of the beast, which is basically a dead man on a parachute. Ultimately, what happens is that Simon and Piggy, so Simon kind of representing some level of spiritual humanity, and Piggy kind of representing the intelligent, rational self, they ultimately killed. They're very brutally murdered, both of them. Simon in a ritualized kind of dance, and Piggy with a rock thrown over his head is extremely tragic. I'll be very interested to know how the BBC kind of treats these murders essentially. And so what Golding is saying is that the rules, and there are rules. You're right, Jonathan. There's rules all over the place. Jack is always making rules. They're forming rules. They're destroying rules, right? But those rules have got to be based upon some ultimate level of humanity. And actually, perhaps the story that is going on right now in the world is that we are reforming those rules, reforming those cliques. There's lots of people saying, well, what was the purpose of the rules-based order? Whose rules are they? Why does it matter? We make new rules. But if we end up in this, philosophy of might is right, maybe we're going to end up in the same position of essential barbarity. And therefore, the question is a really good one. Where do the rules come from? I will say that the rules are intrinsic, innate to the human soul. I won't say that They need to come from a certain scripture, but they need to come from a certain understanding of us being equal under God, which is, I believe, the initial phrases of the American Declaration. But if you're going to say, well, no, rules are just made up and they're just negotiated, it depends upon position, it depends upon what's happening in society at the time, it depends upon context, then you have a problem. You have a very, very, very real problem, and we're living out the realization of that problem right now, where we seem to be hurtling towards destruction and war, to put it mildly.
I mean, I don't disagree with the empirical observation of the state of the world, but
Mm.
I think it misrepresents it to see these
Hmm.
people as not in touch with their own humanity and not in touch with a set of rules and principles.
Which
And I
people?
think the people who are bringing radical revolutionary change into the order of the world, and where might is right is becoming uh, more justifiable as a first line rather than rather than the hard power of soft power,
Mm.
meaning it sits right behind. Rather than a symbolic power. You daren't disagree with me, really, because look what I could do. It's now becoming, look what I'm going to do if you don't agree with me.
So,
It's
so
been
just as an aside to that, there's Stephen Miller um, saying, well, we're going to
that's in the
take
White
America,
House, yes,
yeah,
Stephen.
saying that we're going to take Greenland because we can, because America is a world power, is a global superpower, and
Mm,
we are going to assert ourselves. There's his wife, Katie Miller, coming on a podcast arguing with somebody, I think from the Young Turks, um, and saying you better check your, citizenship application because we can take it from you.
mm.
There's all these kind of dynamics that are going on all the time. They're happening in America very blatantly. They're also happening in Britain. Um, there's people arguing that with the Chagos Islands right now, it's a massive area of debate. I don't know all the ins and outs of it, but essentially, one argument is being made that why do we need to even respect international law? There's no need for us. It's
So,
optional.
so
Yeah,
let's answer that question. Why do they need to? It is optional for them. What's and and
yeah,
and the thing is saying, well, look, you need to
sure.
appeal to a better human value. Well, that never worked well against the might is right philosophy of the bully. What what
Jonathan,
is it? What
if
is
I
it they
sue,
need to hear?
sure, if I sued you for 5 grand and I won it in a court of law in Britain, in England, yeah, would you pay up?
What if you sued me?
Yeah, if I sued you and I won the case,
Depends what I felt about the case.
really,
Yeah,
what happens? You know what the roots of enforcement are in this country.
they can enforce,
I
but I
I
still
can
won't pay.
I Well, I can put a charge in. So in this country, I've been in this position where I used to help my father with his business. So, and I won a couple of cases for him, or I helped him win a couple of cases, right? And then I looked up what the rules of enforcement are. So basically, I can write to your bank account if I find out who your banker is, and
Find out.
I can ask them to freeze your bank account, right? I can put a charge against your assets, such as your property, so you can't sell your property without paying off the money, right? I can also have bailiffs come round to your house. And all of these things, the more you delay the payment,
Mm-hmm.
the more I can charge interest, right? So, and I
Mm-hmm.
think it's a kind of,
What's the point you're making? We seem to have gone off into a strange part of
it's
debt
enforcement,
recovery.
John. Sure, it's enforcement, Jonathan. In this country, law is underpinned by enforcement.
Right.
It's actually
Okay.
underpinned
And the
by
point is,
violence of the state. International law is not underpinned by enforcement. That's why laws in Britain are followed, and why laws around the rest of the world, international laws, are not followed. And in developing countries where the state is weak,
Okay.
such as in
But
Pakistan and
you
other
seem to be
places. Yeah.
arguing against yourself.
In what way?
Well, if international laws aren't followed, it doesn't matter what you do internationally. Might is right.
Might is right when laws are not enforced. Laws need to be enforced in a just manner.
But you just said international laws are not
Uh,
international
sure. They're
order
not
between
followed.
nations is not followed.
I'm I'm not
So
saying.
there
I'm
is
not
no
saying.
enforcement. So maybe might
John.
is right is the solution.
I'm not saying that international laws shouldn't be followed. I'm saying they should be followed. We need to put the enforcement mechanisms in place. Now, the question as to why we don't have enforcement mechanisms is a fascinating question, and that relates to power dynamics, John.
Okay, here's another thing I wanted
Yeah.
to bring up, but it's now is its time. Let's come back to Thomas Hobbes. Good old Thomas Hobbes. We'll keep
Okay.
coming back to
Sure.
him as long as we can't look as might is right without looking at Thomas Hobbes. We
Sure.
can't look at the the way Thomas Hobbes survives 400 years as a fundamental work of understanding governance without understanding the attraction it has to those who hold the power. Uh, so Thomas Hobbes, I think I was discussing this with you recently. Thomas Hobbes
Mm.
is about that in a place where there is no rules-based order, where you have militia. Of course, each militia's got its rules. Where you have militia trying to take bits of land and take bits of slaughtering people where there's extrajudicial force. It's war against man. That there needs to be a power bigger than any other power. This is Thomas Hobbes, who flees in the English Civil War, comes back when Cromwell's in power, not because
Mm.
he likes Cromwell, he's a royalist, but actually he sees that we now have some stability. And the power comes in and says, right, I will take on all these militia, and I am so powerful, they will cease to exist, and they daren't rise against me. The most you're going to get is these little gangs working the east end of London, or they'll have a little venture, but they won't control like they controlled before. And I will strike them down with my sword should they try. Now, that's always worked. That creates the sovereign and the sovereignty in Hobbes's world. This becomes the nation. The modern nation is set up as a strong state which can govern the fractured nature of its own territory. But what's happened with globalization and what's happened with mass communication and the technological changes we've had, is that the world has become far smaller. It used to take 6 months to get to Australia and 6 months to get back. And if I was to send a message to Australia, it took me 6 months to do that. And to get the answer would take another 6 months. Well, now that's possible in a matter of seconds. The communication and the journey time is 24 hours. We've got mass movement of goods and people around the world. Everything's moving very fast. The world has become smaller. The time it used to take for someone to cross from one region in their country to another is the time it takes me to circumvent the entire globe. So there is an argument, as you'd have to think carefully about how it's put in place, that actually this order where everyone gets a say, but there are different battling powers. There's the power of the United Nations, but within the United Nations, there's the Security Council with a power above the power. And within the Security Council, there's 3 powers that have more power than anyone else, and there's probably one of them has more than the other 2. This is very unequal, and it doesn't quite work, but might is right. And what's happening now with the globalization is, and as people start to make move on territory and that becomes acceptable, is we're coming back to the fact of perhaps the beginnings through violent disorder. It will unlikely to take a negotiated form. Through violent disorder, we will start to see the beginnings of a one world state with all the fun and horror of that. But that's possibly where we're going, and there might be a need for that because of the way things are. How do we keep such localisms going? And the irony there, just one more irony to add to the top, is that's being done under the name of American isolationism. But it's not American isolationism. It's race for the world. And as as climate change and the predictions of climate change, which we're not seeing it all, but as those, if you're sitting in government or you're sitting in a large corporation and you're realizing parts of the world will be uninhabitable, and other parts of the world will reveal minerals you never even believed could be there because of mass change, the polar ice caps going and things. As those changes go, you're making moves on the new territories. The world is changing. It's physically changing, and its infrastructure is changing. And therefore, might is right. The war of man against man is in play. But, I mean, we could add other stuff. I mean,
Well,
the American right wing Christianity, just for a point of reference, in the last book of the New Testament, John, there's 2 paragraphs which foretell the satanic forces within large global institutions. So those right-wing Bible breakfast clubs have been riffing off this for the last 20, 30 years. And that's where we
let
find
me,
us.
Jonathan, let me tell you a story from the Quran. I may not remember it in all its detail. God decides to create man, and he presents his plan to the angels. The angels say to God, will you create man who will create bloodshed and disorder in the world? God says, I know those things which you don't know. He then creates Adam. God creates Adam and he teaches him what are called the names. These are generally believed by the commentators of the Quran to be the names of God, or, the praise of God, the glory of God. And he brings Adam before the assembly of angels and asks him to recite the names. The God then asks the angels, have what do you think of this man? And they say to God, well, glory to you. We only know that which you have told us. We could not foresee, these qualities in man. And so God says, didn't I tell you that I know what you know not? The interpretation from the classical commentators of the Quran in this is that man is predisposed to bloodshed, hatred, in and amongst himself, and it's a losing spiral of descent unless one remembers God and his qualities and pulls away from them. And I think it's very important that at the center of our humanity, we have to remember our humility and our brotherhood between all of us as individuals. And if we go down this spiral of might is right, which is where we're going to, we can talk about one party states, we can talk about these kind of hypothesized solutions. But Jonathan, we know where it's ending. This is ending, in some kind of destructive, genocidal wars, in climate crises and catastrophes, in God knows what kind of nuclear wars will happen. God knows what will happen unless we suddenly somehow appeal to a higher sense of self. And so, therefore, I absolutely take issue, Jonathan, with you, to say that there is no rules-based order and to say that there are not ideal forms of rules. I think that's absolutely central to us. And I think that, we may disagree about how to get there, but we have to get there to work out what are the rules which are going to provide a just world for all of us.
I think we left that tipping point a long time ago. I think there are further, as much as in myself, I hear what you're saying. And in myself, there is such a force which is so clear and so
Mm.
good, and I can see other aspects of myself which are more shadowy, which I need to embrace. I need to understand them. I need to let them be. I need to give them their time, but not necessarily act on them, but acknowledge they're there. And there's many parts to me, like anyone else. But I'm also living in a world where people tell stories of vengeful gods, defending gods, angry gods, gods who choose one over another. In fact,
Mm.
I was reading the Quran because I said I was going to have a look at
Mm.
Islam. And I just opened it in the middle, and there it was, telling me that these other religious figures were they were not good. They were cheaters. It even starts warning me of people who are cheaters. There's
Mm.
so, and that's I see that in other religious texts too.
Sure, sure.
Our own exceptionalism, and a nice dose of paranoia of others who are disguising themselves as something else. So it doesn't get. We've got one which is the experience, and if we listen to ourselves, if we could stop and have the time to listen and to listen, not to ourselves as a singular thing,
Mm-hmm.
but within each of us, the more I dig into it, the more characters there I hold in me. I'm I'm hit at the moment. There's a lovely image within Buddhism of a Buddha surrounded
Mm.
by little mini Buddhas. I've been thinking about that recently. This is our nature in a way. We are many things that comes together. Almost like that idea of reincarnation. From moment to moment, our feelings change. I mean, you're a
Mm.
psychiatrist. You're aware there are lots of different aspects, characters to us, and the one sitting here talking to you now is quite different to the person who was cooking dinner. They're very different feelings, and who I was yesterday. Well, I was doing much better yesterday. Today's a bit struggly with lots of different people. And of course, we live in a world of knowledge production where everyone's
Mm-hmm.
selling knowledge on how to be something. But behind all we've been discussing is taking the time to listen and to listen to who we are, to listen to what the gods are, or whatever they are, whatever that is, whatever that space is, regardless of the texts. And I don't think you'll come away with something that is problematic. But once we get ideas, and once we get dogmas, and once we say it's got to be my way, or I'm right and they're wrong, this isn't togetherness. And that's what my book is really about. Is about how do we live together when the people we live
Mm.
with are not ourselves. How do I live with those who are not me? It's a fundamental question. How do I live with parts of me which I don't want to be part of me, but they are? Do I push them down and bury them? You know about that. That's your profession.
I think that ultimately, Johnson, we have to never lose sight of our shared humanity. It is to be human is to understand the human in somebody else, right? You know, actually, it's the simplest trick in psychiatry. It's the simplest trick. If you basically humanize your patient, you treat to them, you treat them, you speak to them like an adult, like a human. You value their views as you would value your own. You know, um, the most complicated situations can just just form like putty in your hands. It's very easy to deal with it, and actually it's remarkable sometimes when that basic humanity is lost. Sometimes it's lost in our services as well, um, and once it's lost, it's very difficult to gain back. Right?
But
Um, yeah, go
Joe,
on.
I mean, the issue that's not being discussed here is power. I mean, it's all very well to see the humanity in someone, but if someone has power over you, do you, by giving, by seeing the humanity in them, uh, what happens next? Do you collude? So if someone has power over you, I mean, maybe the Royal College of Psychiatrists has
Mm-hmm.
power over you, and if they're being highly objectionable and bullying, do you go, oh yes, I see. They're just, I see the human in them. What do you do with that? What do you do where they impose might is right upon you? And that's what institutions do constantly to their members. I'm sure you have disagreements with the Royal College of
Oh, of
Psychiatrists or
course, of
parts
course,
of
yeah,
them.
yeah. I think understanding individuals' autonomy their rights to decision making, for nations their rights to self-determination, to make their own decisions about themselves and their future, whether it's in the psychiatric ward with a patient, or whether it's in Kashmir or any other part of the world. I think that's absolutely fundamental. That and essentially that is actually what the rules-based order is getting at. If we lose that, if we lose that, then we're in trouble. And Jonathan, I'm very, 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 very worried that we are in big, big trouble.
I don't. I mean, my PhD is conflict and violence. I think we're screwed.
On that cheery note,
Sorry.
Jonathan, shall we shall we end it, and we'll
Yeah,
continue the discussion some other time.
sure. Thanks, Musa. Don't know
Thank
why
you,
you're
Jonathan.
laughing. See ya.